This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Alejandro Cárdenas Villa, author of Legacy Traps, Why Family Businesses Fail and How to Protect Yours. He works with multi-generational and cross-border families, navigating succession, conflict, governance, and difficult business decisions. Drawing from psychology, management, law, and finance, Alejandro helps families protect both their relationships and the companies they hope to pass on. Alejandro, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
It's nice to see you, Joe. Very well.
Excellent. Good to see you. And you know, one of the great things about being a podcast, Alejandro, is learning a lot of things and being very dangerous at like holiday parties, because I know a little bit about everything. And so a couple months ago, I interviewed someone who had built one of the biggest like automotive dealerships in America. And he talked about legacy and he wrote this book, and it was really inspiring. But towards the end of the conversation, I said to him, hey, so you mentioned you have like 3 kids, but you decided to sell the company. Why didn't you leave the company to your 3 kids? And he dropped a stat on me that I was not aware of. Again, now I'm dangerous at holiday parties, is that when family businesses get down to the second and third generation, their chances of survival lower dramatically. Something I had never thought about if someone who's never been involved in family business. And this is sort of like your bag, this idea of why family businesses fail. So can you explain that to me when it gets down that generational pipe about why these companies start to struggle?
It's true, Joe, that there's this statistic that by the third generation, most family businesses would have failed or just gone out of business. But that statistic has been reviewed, and it's not so much like that. Sometimes some companies have been sold, so they stopped being a family business, but they continued as a business. Sometimes it's merged into another company. So there's different reasons why a family business might not exist. It might have been integrated into another business. But it's true at the same time that as generations go by, the probability of those businesses failing is higher. And that's because first, the founder has a very particular attachment and feeling towards the business, and the way that the amount of time they dedicate and the passion that they have, it's sometimes difficult for the next generations to feel that way. And that's one of the things that founders have to understand, that not necessarily what they feel and how they feel about the business their children are going to feel about it. But I would say that one of the findings that I've seen is that soccer is a weak link system and basketball is a strong link system. So in a sport like soccer, somebody like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, they can make up for weaknesses in the team and they can take a team to a championship. Like they can basically make up 90% of the game. In soccer, you might have the best goaler, the best striker, but if you have a weak link in your defenders, the other team is going to score a goal. So the objective in soccer is to increase the quality of the weakest link, of the worst player. And when founders are going to leave the company, they think that what they have to do is find the best CEO, somebody that is going to continue with the business and grow the business. And that's thinking of a strong link mentality. So they're thinking, I'm going to find the next Michael Jordan, and it doesn't matter if I have any weak children in terms of not being prepared or not being a good owner, but the CEO is going to just take the company forward. And unfortunately, family businesses after the founder, they become a weak link system. And so the objective of the founder needs to be to prepare every heir, every child, to be at least an average or an adequate owner. So I'd say that's one of the reasons why traditionally businesses Well, family businesses have been trying to find simply the next CEO, and they forget about preparing heirs to be owners.
Excellent. I love that. I'm a sucker for a good sports metaphor, so that's really good. And Alejandro, you open the book by saying that families usually seek your help after something has already cracked. What are these early warning signs that a family business enters the aforementioned book, Legacy Trap? What? Give me an example of a crack.
I'd say that one of the first ones is every time you're in a family meeting, in a board meeting, and there's some conflict, you feel some tension, then something's starting to crack. Definitely the conversation is no longer only about a business decision or something about the company, but you feel it just like in the air, something, there's this tension, there's people are uncomfortable, you feel maybe that not everyone is speaking quite honestly. They're reacting more to the person than to what they're saying. So I would say it's that initial tension that something is not working in the relationship.
So you're saying it's more on the personal soft side than the actual like tangible like in in the dirt, the actual work of it. It starts with personality.
Definitely, it's more than personality, it's the relationship.
Okay.
So you might have heard about Esther Perel, and
Oh, sure.
she's a couples therapist, and I think she coined this phrase that the thing is not the thing. So if there's a couple that's fighting about the color of how they're going to paint a wall, they're really not fighting about the color. They're fighting about their relationship.
Yeah, it's good. I've heard Simon Sinek use a similar case. He uses the toothpaste analogy. If a couple's fighting about who puts the toothpaste cap on, it's not because of the toothpaste; it's because of what's going on in a relationship. So that's interesting. All right, so tell me about these families because you talk about this idea that family businesses should focus on survival before success. And I've had this running theory for a while, Alejandro, because of the sort of this business epidemic that we all have. Like everyone's too busy to do anything. Most people in businesses are basically surviving, not thriving. But in your case here, you're saying that surviving is probably the most important thing. So tell me about that dynamic.
Well, Joe, what happens is if somebody tells you something that you have to do to be successful, it's much more difficult to be able to do it right, and you also need a level of being lucky to be successful. But avoiding mistakes is easier than just doing something right. So the example I give is if you're going to be participating in the Tour de France, unless you're sure that you have a second bike, that you have enough water to be hydrated, that the things you need to at least run, uh, participate in the course are there, it makes no sense for you to start preparing a winning speech. Yeah. So maybe you will not be able to arrive first or second or third, but if you're at least able to finish the tour, well, you can at least participate in being first. But being successful is much more difficult. Like if any successful founder, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, they can give you great advice on how to be successful. But for you being able to implement all those things, it takes a lot of skill, it takes luck, it takes experience. But if they give you advice on what to avoid that will definitely make you fail, it's much more easier to implement. So that's why survival first mentality is you won't be able to be successful unless you survive. And being able to avoid the traps is easier to just being able to implement any success recommendations that you get.
That's great. There was a narrative a little while back that I remember years ago, people were referred this is not family business, but they were referred to their employees as family. And then there was this pushback in I guess in the development space where they're like, well, for a couple things, if it's a family, you can't fire a family member. And two, some people don't have great family backgrounds. So the idea of calling someone a family member is not a good idea. The reason I bring this up is because you have a chapter in your book called Family Comes Last,
Mhm.
and which flies in the face of what most family businesses are built on, that it's family first. Tell me about, that title challenges many readers. What do you mean by putting the business first and family comes last?
Yes. Well, when it comes to business decisions, the family comes last. Because if you bring family as a priority into the business, you're going to be making very bad decisions. So that's what I mean by family comes last in business decisions. If it's in relationships, in your life, anything outside the business, well, it's up to you to decide if family comes first. But if somebody is underperforming, you have a child or a cousin or an uncle that's underperforming, you have to think of the business. Because when you think of the business, you're not only thinking on, people think that it's money, you're thinking on the employees, you're thinking on the clients, you're thinking on suppliers. So there's many stakeholders and many people who depend on the company being healthy, and you cannot just jeopardize the company for one person. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Interstellar.
Sure.
So when they're deciding to which planet they have to go, they only have enough fuel to go to one planet, and they receive this report where Matt Damon went, and it says there's a good atmosphere, that basically that they have the environment to continue with humanity. And when they get there, they wake him up and they tell him, there's no soil, we cannot live here, why did you send that report? And Matt Damon's character says, I didn't want to die alone. Basically, he was putting in jeopardy all humanity just because he didn't want to be alone. So it's this idea that you cannot jeopardize everything just for one person. That's just being too selfish.
Wow, that's a great example. And out of curiosity, because of all the family businesses you've worked with in the past, you talked about this idea of like when you have trouble with like, a son or daughter or cousin in there. How does like the firing process work when it comes to that? Because I mean, I mean, listen, I know how it actually works when you say it, but tell me about the ripple effects it has in a family. Because sure, you may say, "Hey, listen, you can't be part of the company," but then, man, those Christmas parties and Thanksgiving dinners are going to be really awkward. Tell me about the after effects of when companies don't put family first; they put business first, and then eventually have to let go of family.
Joe, the problem is that when relationships are at stake, which is the case of family businesses, founders and even family members tend to think that because they've been successful in business, with which is something that is more rational. Obviously, there's passion, there's emotion, but it's something. If business decisions are rational, maybe sometimes there's a gut feeling, but it tends to be rational. And founders think that because they know how to make business decisions, they have the same skill to make business decisions regarding family. And what they fail sometimes to realize is that they're in a conflict of emotional interest, because it's not only now any regular decision, it's a decision about something that is personal to them. Most founders that come to me, they ask one question: Alejandro, is it good or bad for the family to work in the business? And should I allow for family to work, or should I just simply decide in the family constitution or in a shareholders agreement that family cannot work in in the business? And what I tell them is that's not the most important question. The question you need to ask yourself is, are you willing and able to see a child be fired or let go, either by you, by the board, by whoever is evaluating their performance. Because if you're not, then it's better that you don't hire the family. Because the moment that you're not able to fire someone, then they become unable to be managed. So you should never hire anyone you can't fire. So that's one the first reason. And so then you're asking me, okay, and when somebody's fired, how does the rest of the family react to that? And that's another particularity about family businesses, that objectivity needs three participants for things to be objective. So it's even harder. It's the person making the decision, which has this emotional conflict of interest, and so it's the probability of them being objective is low. And then the person who is affected by the decision, let's say here now it's the child, even if, let's say that the founder sets the compensation, so and the compensation, the salary that they decide is objective, it's a market rate and it's a good, but then the child needs to receive it as objective, and they might want to have a higher compensation, or they might want the decision to be different. So there's a second hurdle which lowers the probability of a decision being objective. And then the third element, which is not common in any other decision, is the other members of the family. So other siblings need to think that yes, that salary is okay, it's market rate, it's fair, or it's not fair. Why aren't they paying higher to my brother or to my sister? So there's too many obstacles for a decision to become objective. So I would say that's why it's difficult for decisions to be neutral. And and so the best way for companies and family businesses to be able to accept those decisions is, again, if the family comes last. So if the children and the siblings understand that in business decisions the family comes last, then they won't take decisions personal.
That's great. And I know you're fact based and you've worked with a lot of family businesses, but is there like, and I hate to use like kind of like these tired business media like cliches of secret sauce, but is there something that always works when it comes to family business and and legacy and keeping it, keep succession within a family in leadership? Like, is there something you see over and over again as to why it does work? You've talked about some of the reasons why it doesn't work, but why do some of them succeed and sometimes even surpass their founder? What are some of the examples that you've seen that the reason that does happen?
When it works, there's many reasons when it works. And basically, when it's a family that has been able to address the risks that I identify in the book, but they've addressed them naturally. So, for example, there's some founders that involve their children in the business when they're very young. So they get to know the business very well. They become connected to the business. They're grateful to employees. And so that by the time they graduate from college, or they're starting to work, they've already participating in meetings. They know how the business works. It's already something they've learned naturally. So that's something that founders do naturally. There's other families that are understand that separation of personal issues and other types of decisions, that they don't take it personal. So I think when the founder in their daily lives has shown children that sometimes you might disagree with them or have personal issues, it's different from the business. Other things that families do is, you'll see founders that can put limits to their children. Either limits because the child is not behaving correctly, or limits because they give feedback, like very honest feedback. And even though it might seem they're not being kind, obviously they're not being disrespectful, but the honest feedback, it's just a personality of some founders that they're able to give honest feedback and they don't feel bad about that. And then the children are able to receive that feedback because they've been accustomed to getting that feedback from parent. So I would say that there's some families or family businesses that have been able to naturally implement the safeguards that I mentioned, but it's because they do them either because it's their personality, they've been accustomed to it, it's just been integrated into how they behave.
That's great. And you mentioned earlier a movie, Interstellar, and I'm going to mention one now too, because every time I think about family businesses, I think of The Godfather. And Tom, the consigliere, is not a family member. And there's even a couple like people butting heads, is like, why are you taking this guy's advice? He's not family. But you see the benefit of having someone who's not a family member in this case, let's just say in the corporate circles, senior leadership. Tell me about the role of that senior leader that's not family and the pivotal part they play in being able to, speak from a place of not being related, but putting that, that business first mentality. What are your thoughts on that, about having, like, when you have these like a senior leadership position that's not filled by a family member in a family business?
Well, every family business should have this independent, neutral third party, either as a board member, as an advisory committee member, in any role. And what they bring is a few things. First, they depersonalize discussions, so it's no longer about a person, it's no longer about a relationship, it's about something business. It's
Yeah.
about the business. Second, they can bring a different perspective, an outside perspective, and try to be more not so emotionally connected, even though it might not be something that is relationship based. But as a founder, as family, we become emotionally attached to something, maybe to a factory, maybe to a store, maybe to an employee, and even just making a decision over that issue that we've become attached. Then this independent advisor also brings some objectivity to the decision. um, every independent member should try to challenge, should try to either be like that devil's advocate, even if they don't agree with something that they're saying. They just bring it to the table to
Mm.
generate that discussion and just bring different ideas to the table. And what I found also is, when it's very different if you go to dinner with your spouse, the way that you behave, maybe making a decision about a trip, then you're going to make a trip and how you talk about the trip and what you're going to do. If you had a third person there, that's not a friend but somebody you just know, the way you would talk about the trip is very different.
Mm.
You wouldn't make it so personal and we're going to have fun here, or it would be more formal,
Yeah, transactional.
transactional. So that's what an independent individual brings to that table. It helps bring any discussion to a more transactional, more formal, more structured decision.
Excellent. So The Godfather had it right. That's awesome. Lastly, Alejandro, to wrap things up, after a family finishes this book, what's the first safeguard they should put into place before the next conflict, transition, or crisis arrives? Is there something that, like, you could put into action? Obviously, your book has a lot of information in it, but is there like a single action that they could start right away after reading yours?
Definitely, one is especially in the parenting side. If you prepare your children well, then many of the safeguards are less necessary. And there's one idea that as parents we have, is we think that we need to make our children happy.
Hmm.
So every time that they're maybe frustrated, or they're facing a difficult situation, or they want something, then we think we have to make them happy. So we remove the obstacle or we give them what they need. And what we forget is that the children need to make each of themselves happy. So what is it that we need to provide to them to make them happy? So in any decision that's going to be made is from a founder's perspective or the older generation is, this decision that I'm making, am I trying to make my children happy, or am I preparing them so that they themselves can make themselves happy? And it's a real change in how you look then at decisions around family and family businesses.
Awesome. And you can read all about it in Legacy Traps: Why Family Businesses Fail and How to Protect Yours. He is Alejandro Cárdenas Villa. Alejandro, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Alejandro and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.